Call this special call meeting of the Danville City Commission. Today's Monday, the 10th of 2021. It's 4:00 p.m. Mr. City Manager, you want to take over?
Thank you, Commissioner Atkins. We are, the first thing on the agenda is the debt summary report for us. We had Mr. Palmer here today, and we'll allow him to introduce himself. He's with Compass Municipal Advisors, who has completed the report. You have it on your desk. It's the bound copy, and that will be what he speaks from. And go ahead.
Thank you very much, Mr. City Manager. My name's R.J. Palmer with Compass Municipal Advisors. I have with me today Keith Brock. We have served as municipal advisor to the city for a number of years now, and in a previous conversation some months ago, I guess, with Earl, he had asked if we would kind of put together a summary or quick reference, so to speak, of the outstanding debt of the city. That's what you have in front of you today. We'll kind of walk through it so you know kind of what we're trying to show you. But if there's anything else that is of interest or you want to discuss, we're here to help and assist in any way possible. Hello, Mayor. You're fine. So we'll wait for him to get settled real quick. So if you look at page 1 of the summary report, in each column, A through H, we identify each of the issues of the outstanding debt that the city has by the series or the year that the debt was issued, the type, whether it's a GO or revenue bond, the description, and then the original amount, the current amount outstanding, interest rate range, final maturity, and the call information. We maintain this information for ourselves as well as the city to identify potentially if there's any opportunity to refinance or refund outstanding debt that the city may have for savings. For you all, obviously, it can be used as a tool or a reference for budgeting times, for budgeting periods, and then to just understand what we have that's outstanding right now. We have looked through the debt portfolio of the city. There's nothing at this time that could be refunded to create savings. You'll note the two 2012 deals that'll be callable in December of next year. As we get closer to that call date, we'll look back at those to see if there's an opportunity to refinance those to save the city some money. And if so, we'll certainly be in contact with Mr. Coffey and the commission. The capacity calculation at the bottom of the page, you are statutorily limited to 10% of the assessed values of the city for your debt capacity, which gives you a capacity of about $129 million. Capacity and ability maybe to pay are two different things. But the city has experienced solid assessed valuation growths over the past number of years, and you currently have $86,208,000 plus of potential bonding capacity. If you look at page 2, and please, if you've got questions, stop us, interrupt us. We're happy to, again, discuss anything you'd like. This is just graphically what our total debt service payments are on a fiscal year basis. And then on the right side, we have identified what each color of the bar is associated with. So what outstanding issues, bond issues, represent each portion of your total debt service payments.
That's general fund debt.
For general fund debt. That's correct. Yeah, but the page prior included all debt. We further went through and broke it down by utility, stormwater, and parking fund debt, so that you can see those broke out separately for different, obviously, payment sources. But yes, Mayor, that is the general fund debt. And page 3, yes.
On that page number 1, you're looking at your bonding capacity calculation. Your outstanding debt subject to legal capacity is your debt supported by your tax base, right? Your service revenue for water, sewer, sports debt, water, sewer.
Right, that excludes the revenue debt. So what is part of your legal indebtedness is what is secured by the general obligation tax pledge of the city.
86 million versus 74?
No, it's 43 versus 66. So the total in column E, the 66,592, that obviously is total, but if you go to the outstanding debt subject to legal capacity, that 43 is what is the general obligation of the city.
Are you suggesting that we are beyond our legal capacity?
No, sir, not at all. You have 86 million in remaining capacity today.
So, correct.
It's total,
Yeah.
okay.
So your legal capacity that is unallocated is the 86 number.
That's
So-
correct.
So you have, your benchmark is 10% of your assessed value, 129,
Mhm.
right?
That's correct.
All right, I'm clear.
Yes, sir.
So very commonly, we looked at a couple of different cities, and we're about where, for example, the city of Henderson I looked at in great detail. So our debt profile is very similar to theirs, especially utilities. For cities with a large utility, we're very, very much in line with those. Matter of fact, our utility itself is still debt low, although our rates are low, it may put pressure on our rates. But our utility, given the fact that we have like our customers, still not necessarily big, relative to the utility size.
And I'll also go back and note on page 1, some of the utility debt was actually issued as general obligation debt. And typically, we look at that if it doesn't encumber any other capital project that the city has on a calendar year basis. We'll sometimes do that because the general obligation debt is a little cheaper than the revenue debt is. So as an assistance to the utility, which obviously is part of the city, there have been a couple of issues that have been issued as GO bonds on behalf of the utility. Page 3, again, is the corresponding numbers that relate to the graph, and that is the fiscal year debt service for each of those outstanding issues. Page 4 is the utility fund debt report. And so this just takes, again, same as what we just showed you, but just specific to the utility fund. And the one thing I'll point out on page 5 is the debt service coverage. You can see above the bars for the annual fiscal year debt service. And that, I think, as Earl just mentioned, that's one thing that we constantly monitor and watch to make sure that we're staying within our covenants on debt service coverage. Page 6, again, is just the numbers behind the graph. And then page 7 is actually the debt service coverage report.
And the reason you've got 2022 is what? Highlighted?
That's the year you're going to.
Correct.
Fiscal year. Literally.
Right.
So we want, so when you get into the budget information, we see debt service, it's that, sheet 6, it's that far right-hand column would be what we budget for debt service.
On the utility.
So as an example, but the total on the general fund as well, and the other funds behind it.
Page 8 begins the stormwater fund report. Again, same thing here. Fiscal year debt service for that fund. The graph on page 9, the 2020 and 2010 debt issues. And page 10, of course, is, again, the numbers behind those. And finally, parking fund report.
The debt tied to the parking fund is totally tied to the park drivers.
That's correct. Page 13, again, obviously shows you the fiscal year debt service payments on each of the outstanding issues.
So that seems overly simple, and, when you look at the budget information and those multiple sheets that are included in that document, it's hard to ascertain what the debt is, which is why we asked Compass to be here today to provide the information for you directly. In total, we would look at that page 1, and really that's your summary, and that the debt service to support column E is what we budget in the debt service sections of your operating budget, which is what we handed to you the other day. And when you're looking at the overall health of the city, for us, for me, what we worry about is the assessed value going up, it trends up. Then the other thing is our debt proportional to that assessed value, is that reasonable? And certainly it seems reasonable compared to other cities. And we do have reserve capacity left, and which is important when we are facing some of the things that we're discussing internally. So I guess that's it.
Let me comment on what you just said, though.
Yep.
Even though you have capacity for debt, you got to have the cash flow
That is
to
correct.
support the debt.
That is totally correct.
Okay. Gentlemen, the 2008 GO bond,
Mhm.
is there an economic reason to seek refinancing on that?
There would, I believe it's a swap, correct? Yeah, it's a derivative product, Mayor. It's in a swap rate, and the breakage on the swap would eat up the savings.
That's all I need to know.
All right, my question is, we have, on page 1, let's say 66 of that outstanding debt.
Mhm.
And then meet our budget. I hope I can take the great holiday lines for 2022.
For the debt that's supported by the general fund, that is correct.
And the utility fund on page 6, the little gray line on that sheet.
Well, we can see those numbers. Yeah, found way.
That's correct.
Yeah.
I probably could afford to put twice as much there, right?
Any more questions on debt, and then we'll get into the capital sheets I gave you.
So is there any sort of recommendation to change anything or refinance anything at this point?
No, again, we'll keep an eye on those, the two deals, the 2012s that will be callable in 2022. As we get toward that call date, we'll monitor those and see where current market rates are, and if there's savings within those, obviously, we'll notify the city.
Okay.
And begin that process, if it makes sense to refinance those.
Okay.
Yeah, we don't have any anticipated requests for debt in the fiscal year we're going into. We are, you have money set aside for the wastewater plant now. You have money set aside for the fire station next door now. In the fiscal year we're going into, the thing that could change that need would be some issue in the spring that could arrive from the Lebanon Road sewer project that was talked about, if you'll remember, to serve the industrial area. That's shelved currently until the need to pick it back up occurs. We're completing design and we'll have it approved, and that will be a project that we try to seek funding on down the road. But in terms of the fiscal year we're in right now, our focus is finishing what we have.
What is the net interest cost on a GO bond for 20 years and 30 years in today's market?
You're still sub-2 on 20-year money right now. 30-year money, we don't do a ton of 30-year, but what? 2 1/4. 2 1/4, yeah.
So the fair request to look at everything from 2017A through 2028?
As a matter of refunding, Mayor, is that correct?
Well, we can't do 2027, okay.
Correct. Now, there is discussion currently in Congress of allowing the advanced refundings again, which, as you recall, before the Jobs Act, we could advance refund an issue like this if it made economic sense. And then in the Jobs Act, they took that tool away. There is some discussion, so we continue to monitor that. If they were to reinstitute that, we'd obviously have a lot of debt to look at to see if it made economic sense.
Thank you, guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you all very much. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Thank you.
Okay, so you have a set of sheets that we printed for you. These represent the capital that we will program or make an effort to program into the budget. Some of it we will ultimately need to get how you feel about it and your decision on it. You can look at it, and then when we come back and before we provide a final budget, we will ask you your thoughts on this. Also, we will try to make sure that we have the revenue set aside for the year we're in, or the reserve funds. This is capital, so it can be augmented with reserve funds. And so we will see what level of investment you can make in capital, and then that will be a follow-up presentation. But for today, I wanted to make sure you understood what was programmed into the 10-year capital plan and the year that we're going into, the adjustments made based on field conditions for projects, such as bid prices for the fire station next door. What impact did that have, right? The sheet number 1, the first column is old, but we left that grayed out. The second column is the year you're in, the FY 20 to 2021. The next column is year you're going into. So the years 2021-2022 is the fiscal year that is being proposed, and that is the column that we will try to program into the budget. The capital is broken out to the police department, about $220,000 investment. The fire station next door, in the year we are seeing, we think that there will be about $6.5 million left in that year. The communications, $22,000. Public Works, $917,000. Parks and Rec, you're looking at $678,000. Remember that there's a lot of grant money tied to that as well. If you'll remember, we had the Land and Water Grant. A couple of those things will not hit until you're going into the next fiscal year. And then there's a request in IT and codes, for example, parking garage, there's $180,000 worth of other requests. The Stormwater Fund has $375,000 worth of capital. The Cemetery Fund has $315,000, including equipment and development of the master plan for the committal spaces or the committal structures, for example. And the Utility Fund has $13 million in capital programmed, including the wastewater plant and the Perryville Road water line and water tower. The parking garage has 170. Remember, Josh talked about protecting the western elevator shaft with some sort of weatherproofing. And so that's the money for that. When you get into it, we've broken it out. The next two sheets, sheets 2 and 3, are looking at those numbers with a little bit more detail. So, for example, the police department will top line it for you as $220,000. So on this sheet, it has a list of what makes up that $220,000 in the fiscal year we're in.
Okay, so this, I'm just understanding now, this is not actual capital assets, these are capital
Requests.
investment requests. We're
Yeah.
talking about spending again.
Yes.
Okay, I
Yes.
was looking for the assets and the investments.
Gotcha.
Okay.
That will come in your with your audit. You'll see a list. Your asset changes will come with your audit.
Okay,
Yep.
got it now.
So this is the request from the police department. They're requesting expenditure in their building space, some walls repainting and flooring, body armor, a copier, video cameras, electronic radio system, firing range expense, vehicle equipment, tasers, and mobile data computers. Some of those are reoccurring annual expenses in the capital program, and you'll see that when we get into the next sheet. So what we've done is we've taken all of the departments that's identified on page 1 for the fiscal year we're going into. We've summarized what their capital items are on these sheets 2 and 3 for the fiscal year we're going into, the proposed year. The next sheet is a breakout of the long-term view of capital for each one of those departments. So, for example, sheet 4 is the police department, right? And so in that column 3, fiscal year that's being proposed is 22. That's column 3. All of the numbers that are on page 2 for the police department are in that column on that sheet. And you can see then the next year and the next year after that, how that department is spending capital long-term. So, for example, vehicle equipment appears as a capital request the year we're in, but in that line in that sheet 4, you see it, that is a recurring expense, money we budget every year for outfitting police cruisers and whatnot. So the total for that year is 220 on that sheet. The total for the next year is 265. The year after that, their request would be right now 180. And so as you can go forward, you can see how that spending profile changes and adjusts minorly over time. You spend about $200,000 to $250,000 a year in the police department on capital items.
Why do we continue to have line items on video cameras each and every year in the same way with mobile data computers?
Because we don't purchase every computer every year. You have those programs so that you buy some every year, right? So
I
that
got
then
you. Okay.
each one has a
It's a
life
cycle.
so that it's affordable.
And a cycle.
and a reasonable replacement cycle of your capital.
Police and fire have certain gear that is mandatory to replace.
That is correct, yeah. Or you want to be serviceable by, and therefore you replace it. It's kind of what I've always referred to it as operating capital versus infrastructure capital. So a building has a different view than operating capital, such as a car or mobile computers and that kind of thing. So each department is broken out in that same way as we go through. And certainly we won't necessarily try to read that to you, but we're giving you the information. If we can come back and talk about it another time, or I can take the time to read each individual department for you. But what you have is it broken out with 3 pieces. You have the summary sheet, which has page 1, which is the year we are proposing that we will try to fund in this budget. Then you have a projection of future years on that sheet 1. For the year we are proposing, you have the breakout on sheets 2 and 3 of the detail of the capital that's being sought for this year. And then you have additional projections for each department in the subsequent pages 4 through 14 for each one of those departments or line items on the first sheet.
Parks and Rec, you're being pretty ambitious in fiscal year 22, 23, aren't you?
So let's go to page 8 and we'll talk about that for a minute.
That was, Jay's already on it.
So that represents in year 22, 23, a significant investment in Parks and Rec facilities. That was programmed, actually, that was last year, that was carryover from your budget process last year. The year we're going into, and starting now, we will, so the city has acquired the fairgrounds property. You've acquired Jenny Rogers. You have a Parks and Rec master plan that has identified facilities that are missing or needed. And so what we will do is we will invest this year in planning those spaces that you've acquired. And so that when you get into your budget next year, right now, your long-term budget documents incorporate the investment of $7.5 million in Parks and Recreation in next year, right? So you get to decide, or you have to decide, is that really what you want to do? Or as we go through this planning process, maybe that number comes down. Maybe, we don't really know yet, right, until we get into it. And so, but we have a placeholder for that. We're showing that as long-term capital, and certainly that's a decision that you guys will make over the course of time. We're not making that decision now.
But we didn't put the purchases in this Parks and Rec budget, it just was in the general capital?
You are paying that out of reserve, so you'll have a budget amendment tonight where you invest in the structure. The investment in the fairgrounds, for example, occurred in a different budget year that's not on this sheet previously.
Okay.
And so you're just not seeing those on this sheet, partly because you didn't have Parks and Rec as a department prior to this past July,
Okay.
right? So you don't see those expenses. The expense that would have shown up would have been the Jenny Rogers expense, but there's no benefit to showing that in that the year we're in is concluded already anyway.
Or
Right.
wouldn't it be more realistic to take that aquatics and move that out to at least 23, 24, if not 24, 25? Because
Well, but-
you talk about a lot of engineering.
Well, I think
I
you're
think-
looking at a 3 to 5 year window of completion, and the first step is doing the engineering and the design, so we would need to start that theoretically
Right.
next year.
So in the same way that if you go to, come back to the fire department. Let's do that.
They probably would get shifted, but
Page 5. you're looking at, on the first two columns there, you're looking at what we expect to spend on the fire station this year, and then the balance that will happen next year on the fire station. So, that number could change next year. So you may end up with the number, by the time we get to the projected end of the next fiscal year, that number might be 4, and then you may move into FY '23, $1 million. It depends on the schedule of construction. So big investments like that tend to be, they tend to move through your capital plan as each budget is passed, based on the actual expenditures and your actual implementation schedule.
What's the 1.8 in 24, 25?
That is for future facilities, and that was programmed, again, last year. That's for a third station,
Gotcha,
the investment in a third station.
gotcha.
That's where we put it as a target. You could start building that next year. For example, this number could move up to FY '23, right? And so all of these numbers, this is a projection that we use to establish it. So it's important that we put expenses in there, even if they're guesses sometimes, or even if they're targets, so that we can more accurately do our projections on the 5-year budget.
I have 2 quick questions.
Go ahead.
Very simple. So what I'm hearing is we have the 240 for Jenny Rogers in reserve, we're paying in full, no loans, right?
Correct.
And then I heard earlier, there's money set aside for the fire station.
That's
Is
correct.
that going to be paid in full?
The
Or is
fire
it-
station, you borrowed the money for the fire station, the budget before last.
Oh,
Right,
so
so
y'all
that is-
did that before,
that
so
is-
it is a borrow.
It is a borrowed amount. It is in your reserve funds. And it was, if you look at that debt report,
So it's in here somewhere.
yeah, I'll
Okay.
point it out to you real quick. So your 2018 issuance, your GO bond, fire stations and truck on page 1 of your debt report. Do you have the debt report?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, on page 1, down there on column A, if you go to 2018, and then column C says fire stations and truck, right? So that was the year that you borrowed money for the fire station. And I would have to go
Okay.
back and look at what the breakout was to find out what the difference between the fire station estimate and this number was. The truck we bought that year, I want to say was more than $1 million. But I don't have that information in front of me, right? So you borrowed the money for the fire station here and you're still spending it. So then when we look at this sheet on page 5 of the printouts I gave you, down at the bottom, that 1.5 and that 5.5, they're funded out of your reserves, which are holding that money that was borrowed,
Okay.
right?
So it's being paid through 2039. Okay.
I'm sorry.
Oh, final maturity is 2039?
There's debt, yes, that debt will be paid off according to the schedule is 2039, that's correct.
And if it's under budget, you get the money back?
Well, you have money in your reserve, and so
Okay.
that's low interest too. So it's general obligation debt, meaning you can use it for any purpose in your general fund typically. And so what you'll notice too is that you have a fire station on that page 5 of the handout, not a fire station, you are scheduled to replace engine 17 this year. That's $750,000. So you could use that general obligation debt to finance that truck, for example. And you already have possession of that money. So because that was under budget, you can continue to use that money for this purpose without new financing for that truck.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
What I like about page 8, though, is that it will give us an opportunity to have some serious conversations about the Aquatic Center and about Jenny Rogers and about parks in general. And it probably would be, if we move on it, another financing type deal, not a cash outlay. But I like the fact that it forces us to have some serious conversations about it, so.
Yes, and so, when you, if you were to do that, on page 8, if you were to invest in your Parks and Recreation, that stuff would be, there would be some revenue tied to that, but you probably wouldn't necessarily consider, I don't know what your bonds would look like. I don't know if they'd be revenue bonds or GO bonds. But those would, that is anticipated to be debt service
On the aquatic center,
when that's built.
that has to be a GO.
Yeah,
Well, and the other thing about that is that if the public is really sincere about that as a desire or that as a need, then that big old word which starts with capital T might come into play as well, so.
so
For
we,
what?
Capital T? Tax increase.
well,
We can float a bond just, I mean, float a,
we'll figure that out.
I
We'll-
know, what I'm saying, but that's another option though,
Yeah,
yeah. I don't like that word, that's why I whispered it, but if we're ever gonna get this off the drawing board into a reality, some serious discussions about finances will have to take place.
yes, and that's a true statement. If you,
That's why I appreciate you putting that in there, yeah.
yeah, and so, you know, we would be remiss if we didn't add that the Parks and Rec Master Plan identified some substantial facilities that we do not have here,
Yeah.
that other communities do have. For example, you know, it's easy to point to Versailles. They do have an indoor multipurpose building where kids can go play on the weekends, or you can have access to those on the weekends, for example, or after hours, and we don't have that accessibility here. Somerset, for example, they have space like that, indoor space that is used for, it's a multipurpose building. We don't have that here. So when we talk about being economically competitive, one of the things you talk about is, when we talk about the downtown master plan, we talk about livability, we talk about Parks and Recreation, we talk about livability. When you don't have those assets, the question you guys will have to ask eventually as we develop these concepts is, do we need these facilities to continue to make ourselves more livable as compared to our competitors in central Kentucky or the region, right? And so just a lot to think about, and we will get into the Parks and Rec concept as we develop those concepts as staff this summer a little bit. We're going to take, now that we have a Parks and Rec director, we'll take that master plan, we'll see what that looks like with our facilities. We'll go through our staff exercise, and then we'll come back with some meetings with you all and present some of those ideas that we can come up with. So this is really the goal of this quick meeting today, was to put the Compass report in your hands so that you could have it, you can look at it. I know Commissioner Holland has asked me a couple questions. We'll answer those for her. But as you get questions, please feel free to ask. Also, as we get into the development of the full budget document, you understand what the capital request is for the year we are going into, what we will be trying to fund from revenues and reserves, and then we'll see what that looks like when we get it fully assembled.
I'm sure it's in here about the broadband through the water infrastructure.
Yes, so if you go down to sheet, where that will show up is on sheet 12 and 13. Down at the bottom of sheet 13, that is the utility capital that's fully described in detail. If you look at the very last line,
There you go.
above subtotal, you'll see that denoted, right? And so we will see if that's something that we can fund, and that will be something that we will ask you, do you want to fund that? So this is the totality of the request, and if you say nix that, then it won't be in the budget, right? We will go through that and identify that in detail with the full proposed budget. And we may have another meeting to talk about the capital request in more detail if y'all want to. I'd like to get the budget assembled with this information incorporated into it to really see where you sit too. Right. Because, I mean, you know, there's there's some of that you can fund from reserves. You know, once you see how this overlays against your surplus in operating revenue versus your reserves, then you get to make some of those hard decisions on what level of reserve you want to leave, how much of this you want to do this year, and then we will develop then the final version of the budget that we would seek adoption after we do that. Of course, you've got to develop your proposals on the community agencies, for example, and so you do have a couple missing steps before we can assemble the full budget.
But Earl, I want to thank you and Ashley and staff and everybody else. This is real good material, and it's easy for us non-finance experts to understand. Good report. I really like the projections next 5-10 years. So you ready for a motion, Mr. Mayor?
You're driving this bus, go right ahead.
Oh, I'm driving the bus?
Yes,
Well,
sir.
Well, Chair is ready for a motion to adjourn the special call meeting.
I'll move to adjourn.
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Meeting's adjourned. See you at 5:30, right? Man.